So we're going to start our presentations. Our first presenter is Rika Preiser. She comes to us from South Africa. She's going to talk to us about her research that explores the development of complexity.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be with you today. I love the title of this day and the theme of it. It's really a very important theme from where we work and where we're based. And I realize I only have 10 minutes. I'm just noting that. Just to say, I'm situated in Stellenbosch University in Cape Town, southernmost kind of university space in Africa. We're in South Africa, and I'm affiliated and work as associate professor at the Center for Sustainability Transitions. We're an interdisciplinary research center that works with sustainability challenges from the perspective that all these challenges are complex, meaning that we use a systems approach to think about sustainability as such, but also then more specifically what it means to our context and how we can think about water, energy, food, governance challenges from an integrated nexus approach and develop methods that allows us to think these things together rather than analyze them in separate spaces. The other part of the title in our center's name is Transitions. Sustainability transitions, which means that there isn't an end goal to sustainability, but that sustainability itself is a process, and we use a lot of process ideas, process philosophy, systems philosophies to kind of think, what does change mean from a perspective where you don't have an end goal that you reach? And being from a very diverse working into a very diverse space, sustainability or wellness or what it means to be human means many different things depending on who you are, what color you're from, what privilege you have, where you're based, what kind of resources you have, what dreams you have, and what you're aspiring to. And for us, we are very much aware of the fact that we don't have one answer to the question of either what it means to be human or what it means to be living a good life or what the goals towards the reaching, of a state of sustainability is. And often our students challenge us to say that, even sustainability itself is a very white, Western, liberal idea. And often, for many of our students, sustainability is the second colonization of freedom. In a sense, what does it mean to kind of become developed, from a different perspective is often challenged within our spaces. So that's just the background and the context within which we work. And very much in this space, we are also rediscovering what it means to live with African values or integrate African values into the kind of ideas around sustainability research, around what it means to be a change agent, bring about change, but also what are tangible things that we can do in the space to actually respond to the urgency of, our communities and the space in which we work, where we don't really have the luxury of thinking about change in a long term. So in my role as being a part of the member of the chapter of Rome, working very closely with Mampele Rampele on bringing new African narratives to the forefront in the sustainability space or in how we think about change. We worked on a paper together, and I think this is what I've kind of been, I wouldn't say briefed, but I thought this was, what I could be speaking into, and I'll quickly share my screen here. So we came up in the Club of Rome with this document called Towards New Narratives of Hope for Fostering Transformative African Futures, as a kind of a document or a brief or a discussion paper around which we can start having some kind of discussion and engagement around African philosophies or African ideas that could inform how we think about transformation and how we could think differently about going forward, from thinking of the future not as kind of, I would say, colonized by Western ideals, but developing our own ideas and imaginaries around what future does Africa want for itself. And in this paper, we drew on these ideas, and specifically on, we're often kind of prescribed by donors or ideologies that inform current sustainability practices and development practices on, what development should be for Africa. And we've very much wanted to orientate ourselves to kind of an African ideals and values. We drew on the work of Bayo Akumalafe, who says that what if the way we respond to our problem is part of the problem? And what questions are possible today? What if the way we act actually serves to reproduce the same conditions we are striving to escape? We use that as a kind of a prompt to think about, how can we respond differently? What do we need to actually break free or out of, or even ask new questions for ourselves? In a sense, we wanted to find what would be an Africa-centric worldview, seeing that these challenges, often bring to us solutions that are also not very Africa-centered. And we drew on the work of this new narrative of hope, which we said we wanted to kind of build and think about around harnessing a more moral and spiritual, I wouldn't say way of war, but finding, those are the words in the document, but actually coming up with solutions. Because many solutions that we get from the sustainability field today are quite technocratic, are quite out there, that's really kind of, I would say, technical, machinistic, industrial in the same way. And we wanted to draw on inner values. So what would inner values be that we as humans could embrace to be more human in this space, or bring a more human approach to the solutions that we are looking for? So we said, well, by fostering narratives that draw on the power of remembrance, reverence, and resurrection, we are afforded the means to reimagine hope through radical love and revolutionary practice. And this is really drawn from African-American philosopher Cornel West, in his ideas around responses that we can come up with. And we drew on this notion of remembrance. So remembering is actually really calling together our humanness. So, remembering doesn't just mean drawing on our histories and our indigenous knowledge practices and the lineage of our ancestors, but actually to be more human in this space means bringing the members of who we are and in ourselves together again. And that's really captured by the notion of Ubuntu. Africa offers not a world, and we said we didn't want to produce a new world order that essentializes Africa, but we would like to kind of create a place from where all can engage in the process of remembering what it means to be human, which is really grounded in a relational, ethical imperative of becoming with others, which is a bit of we say it's a radical relationality, and we embrace all the indigenous knowings of relationality or becoming with each other, which in the South African or Bantu kind of traditions is called Ubuntu, but in Yoruba it's Iwa, in Igbo it's Omenala, in Sudan in Akan it's Suban, and in Shona it's Ukama. So there are many different manifestations of this notion of Ubuntu all across Africa, but also what we found in South American and East Asian traditions. So it's not something it's something unique about how we give voice to that and embody and work with these ideas of Ubuntu in Southern Africa. But we acknowledge in this paper also that relational worldview that kind of really underpins this notion of Ubuntu is manifested in many various First Nation communities around the world. And the bottom line of it, or the core idea of Ubuntu, is really this idea that we are only humans, or we can only be a human by acknowledging our deep relationality or connectedness with other humans. And this relational worldview also extends to non-living or transient beings. Recently, a student and myself, we brought out a paper based on my student Melanie Karsten's work called Exploring Relationality in African Knowledge Systems. And we kind of wanted to unpack this notion of Ubuntu a little bit more. So this notion of Ubuntu isn't subscribed or ascribed to a specific philosopher in Africa. It's an African worldview, a cosmology as such. that doesn't belong, the idea doesn't belong to a specific philosopher or, you know, specific group of people even, or a specific, you know, region. And we wanted to expand this and give some, and demystify the word of it, because the word itself is also being used quite loosely these days to kind of just say, oh, we have this Ubuntu idea, but not many people have a close idea of what that means. So we went through all the literature that we could find to think about this notion. And really the basic idea of Ubuntu can be defined as humanness or humanity. However, as a philosophy, it encompasses an intricate web of desirable relationship between people and in a community. And as a value, it advocates for well-being, respect, and humanity. The word itself, you would know, is made out of two different morphemes, ubu and ntu, which respectively means being and person. And when conjoined in a kind of elementary fashion, create being a person. So ntu really means, the word itself, Ubuntu, really actually from its morphological and semiological form really says that, you know, we become human through this life force that connects us all with each other, which informs a specific kind of a cosmology. And then some African philosophers now these days are trying to also say, well, how would we recognize that? How is that demonstrated? Can we see that in a specific way? And it's kind of such an ingrained way of seeing and relating to the world. And we try to kind of just elicit specific ways in which people can actually recognize that. So some philosophers say, and Zimbabwe actually said that, you know, we can recognize Ubuntu in the way people walk and how they talk and how they smile, how they treat others, how they greet others, and how they practice moral values. So it actually kind of encompasses all the embodied, entangled notions of what it means to be in relation to one another in a specific way. And we've also kind of looked at, you know, where we go back to this notion of Cornel West, which is about reverence, which really calls us to kind of reclaim ownership of our African way. We found that the notion of respect is really embedded in this notion of reverence, and that Ubuntu also helps us to respect and ourselves, to reclaiming our contexts and our deep cultural traditions and ethical values, and to bring that into our kind of, you know, hidden genius, that we can kind of live that out. So, which means that we recognize the existence of our vulnerabilities, and we give a kind of we bring this in our workforce, in our local surroundings, in our communities that we operate in. The notion of ukama, I'm almost done, is the Shona interpretation of Ubuntu, which also is we found a really good demonstration of this notion of respect and reverence, because Ukama extends the notion of relationality not just to other people, but to other beings, and especially non-human beings. So it gives this extended notion of our how we are relationally constituted, also with nature. And there's a wonderful example that Murove uses when he says the word itself is an adjective made up of the u and kama, where kama means to milk a cow or a goat. While seemingly abstract or unrelated in a sense, we know that a cow or a goat cannot milk itself. So there are actions, realizing that there are actions in the world that has to take place that cannot happen by themselves, like to love someone or to respect someone or to, you know, communicate. All of these things that make us human actually cannot happen in singularity. It can only happen in relation to either, you know, someone else or some natural being, and that this is the kind of notion, being related or belonging to the same family, the extended family, is what Ukama is about. So, and we're trying to kind of, in this paper, we're trying to see, well, what does that mean for how we can rethink economics, governance, and education in an African context, and what are actual tangible ways in which we can find a way for that. that's my 10 minutes or my 15 minutes. And I'd like to just use this as a prompt for discussion and for further investigation. Also, also saying that, for us, using these words, Ukama and Ubuntu, doesn't mean, and our students remind us of that all the time. And we've had a recent discussion in my teachings last week from a student who came from Malawi, who then lived in Zimbabwe, and said, well, sometimes white people use these words as a kind of a kumbaya, oh, we will all be happy now together word. Whereas if you understand the lived experience of Ubuntu and Ukama, really means that you are relational through a certain kind of belonging to each other. And if you come into a new space, often you don't have that, what they call kama or ukama. You first need to build that up. And often that only happens through, first period of alienation, but then reconciliation, and becoming part of place and part of community. So I want to give recognition of that, to say that, often in our reimagining of what it could be to bring an African perspective into Western dominated spaces, we often, feel very justified as white people to kind of use these ideas in very soft and warm and great feeling kind of ways, whereas the lived experience of these ideas come from a very different perspective, an embodied knowing of it, which still remains, not our first experience of that, but at the same time, we are invited to bring those ideas and to learn more about that in our discussions with one another. Thank you very much.